Ta la 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 la. Ta la 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 da da. Ta la 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 da da la 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 da da da. Lovely little bit of music that is. I don't know whether it's Mozart or Beethoven, but which it is, it's very nice, and it's a kind of a little melody that haunts you. 'Twas while we were at Chilwell that I heard my first rendering of the Messiah. It was at Chilwell Road Methodist Church. I really enjoyed it. It was at Frith Cottage that we had a visit from Jim Penswick. If you remember, one of my pals when I was in the Royal Flying Corps in Belgium. He had come looking for work because the things were getting bad. Even he lived in Preston and they were getting bad round there, and he was unable, he'd fallen out of work and couldn't get a job round there. But he wasn't successful even in looking round Beeston, because there was, well, the unemployment problem was general, like it is at the present time. That's in 1986. Mum's sister Prudence and her husband Eric stayed a week with us while we were at Chilwell. Eric took Mum, Joan and Eileen on the river in a rowing boat. Of course, I was at work, or I wasn't on that trip. The children usually enjoyed this sort of thing because it wasn't often that we went on the river, if we're not rowing at any rate, because I didn't like to risk myself with the children in case anything happened. Our first Christmas at Chilwell was very nice too. The children's presents from their grandparents and the presents that we gave them kept them quite busy on Christmas Day, playing with them. And of course, although it was a quiet time, there was just the four of us, we all enjoyed the day. And the children were tired by about 8 o'clock, so we put them in bed, and Mum and I sat reading in the parlour. I can always remember that night because it was so nice and quiet after the children had gone to bed, and I'd bought 2 books in Woolworths. One was called Burning Daylight. It was by an author by the name of Jack London. I don't know whether you modern people have heard of Jack London, but he was a very popular writer at that time. Mum was also reading a book called Widdicombe Fir. That had to do with the Devonshire in the country districts. But both books only cost 6pence each, and they were hardbacks and classics from Woolworths. There was no free library at that time, but we could always get these books from Woolworths that kept us busy reading when we had time for it, because we didn't seem to have a great lot of time. Normally we were in bed early, about 10 o'clock. There was one thing unpleasant happened on that Christmas Day. but it was to a neighbour named Miss Oldham, and she lived on her own, just next door but one to us in these cottages, and while she'd been preparing her Christmas dinner, she'd scalded her leg, and she had one son but no husband, and he came round to our back door and told us, and I went and I took a bottle of olive oil and some bandages, and I treated her for the scald. And it must have been all right, because she never even went to the doctor with it after it got better. It got better on its own without her going there. My parents also spent a week with us in the following summer. And one thing about that summer was that about the back end of the summer, one night there was a very fierce gale, and it blew 12 trees in Bramcote Lane down. Now these trees they must have been hundreds of years old, because they were very tall trees, and they made a kind of an avenue down Bramcote Lane. And I remember taking the children on Sunday morning to have a look at them, and they hadn't got moving at that time, because it had happened on the Saturday night, and they hadn't got moving to remove them, and they were still lying right across the road where they'd fallen. Our second Christmas, while we were at Chilwell, was spent with our parents at the Holt. We travelled by train to Warrington via Derby and Manchester, then by bus to the Holt. We stayed at my parents', but we had Christmas dinner with Mum's parents. On Boxing Day, we spent with Mr. and Mrs. Turton of St. Helens, who were the employers of Mum's sister Elsie. She was the housekeeper. It had turned cold, and it was freezing very hard. We had a nice holiday, and it was very nice to be with our parents at Christmas time. We returned to Chilwell next day, that was after Boxing Day, and we found that our source of water was frozen up, because with no taps in the house, there was a pump outside, and we had to go and pump the water up from this pump whenever we wanted to use it. And of course, when we got back and it was frozen, luckily we'd fill the kettle up before we went away, and we boiled the kettle, and I can remember pouring the kettle of boiling water down the pump to get the water going again. This spell of frost lasted quite a long time. I don't know whether it wasn't about 3 weeks or so. I can always remember that there was a stretch of floodwater that ran from the bottom of Meadow Lane in Chilwell, when you got just over the railway, and this flood water in winter, especially in winter when there'd been a lot of rain previously, and the water used to lie, but it stretched right to Attenborough, and it had frozen right over. And I remember borrowing a pair of skates, and on Saturday afternoon I took Joan and Eileen to the river, and we had a happy afternoon. I was skating and Joan and Eileen were sliding, and it was some time before the frost cleared up, but it did eventually, like any other time. Joan and Eileen used to attend the school down Meadow Lane. It was only about 50 yards away, and wasn't far, which meant that it wasn't very far for them to go. And they used to come home, and especially in the winter time when they'd had little singing sessions in the school, and they used to learn nice poetries, and they used to come home and recite these poetries to us. Sometimes I used to take Joan and Eileen up Cater Lane for a walk instead of going down Meadow Lane, and it was always enjoyable. There was hardly any houses up Cater Lane at that time, and on the left-hand side, when you got about halfway between the high road and the golf links, which stretched across the top of Cater Lane, about halfway there was a wood on the left-hand side, and I used to take them in this wood, and I can always remember that one time when I was walking through the wood with them, we found a robin's nest. Robins used to make their nest in the grass, and we found this nest in the grass at the foot of a tree, and there was I think there was 6 eggs in it. I remember there were little white eggs with pink spots on. But Joan and Eileen were quite thrilled to see these eggs in the nest. Well, in the summer of 1929, Sheila was born. So that was another busy time. My sister Phoebe, she was only a young woman at that time, perhaps about 17 or 18, and she came to look after Mum while Mum was in bed, and the midwife who attended to her was a woman named Nurse Hathill, and your Mum liked her very much. She said she was very good and helped to make the birth easy for your Mum. Of course, I couldn't stop at home and do anything because we still wanted the money. Money was very short in these days, and I had to go to work to earn the money because the grant that we got from the government on these occasions was only very small. As I've said before, I think it was about £2 to pay the doctor's fee. And if you didn't have the doctor, then you had the £2. But of course, you had to pay the midwife out of that. It wasn't free. But now that we had 3 children, it was necessary to start looking round for a house. One that wasn't furnished. Well, in the last few years at Beeston, I'd gradually begun to get more interested again in trade union matters and politics, especially the Labour Party, of course, and all the things that happened, all the hardships that we had to put up with, only made me a stronger Labour supporter and a strong trade unionist. And if I was interested in anything, I usually began to attend meetings regularly and take a part in speaking and putting my point of view. And the outcome of it was that I'd gradually taken up office again. It wasn't much, I was just assistant secretary. But nevertheless, I attended some of the Labour meetings that was held in Beeston. The point I'm trying to put is, because of that, I got to know some of the Labour councillors on Beeston Council, So the only chance of getting a house, of course, was a new house, was a council house. And I went to see these Labour councillors who I got to know, and in order to ask them to use their influence a bit in getting me a council house. And actually, they must have done, because I put my application in, and it wasn't very long before I got notification that I'd been allotted a new house. That there was quite a lot of houses being built, probably about 50, I should say, on some land off Queen's Road. This land had been allotments during the war, and it belonged to the council, and the council had decided to build these houses on this piece of land. It was called Alexandra Crescent. And, of course, as they were building the houses, as the houses got finished, they were allowing the tenants to go in, even though there was no roadway, and all around the houses was just all rough land, as the builders had left it. But we weren't bothered about that as long as we got into a house. And I tell you, that was our first rented house where we had to ourselves. And this occasioned us quite a lot of happiness. Although later on I'll tell you that your mum began to dislike that particular part of Beeston. It was about 6 months before these houses were finally finished, and they hadn't made a road round, so it wasn't until the houses were finished 6 months later that they began to make the road. And then they began to partition the land around into gardens for each tenant. Of course, they were only concrete posts with some wire stretched across, but it did divide the various houses. And it wasn't until they'd finished the road and done all this sort of business that we could start doing anything in regard to gardens. And as it was getting near winter then, there wasn't much we could do until the following summer. But the following summer, I began to, the front garden, I made a bit of a lawn out at the front, and with little borders round for flowering plants. And the back garden I used to grow vegetables on. In 1930, things seemed to be going very nice for us. Work was going on all right. No short time or anything like that. In fact, now and again we even got a bit of overtime in. But we had both our parents to stay with us in the summer, and we were able to go down to the river and Bulletin Park and places like that to show our parents. They quite enjoyed it. And on the whole, another thing that happened in 1930, as I mentioned, I'd become more and more active in the union and politically, and I became the secretary of the Beeston branch of the Amalgamated Engineering Union that year. Some good factory-made wireless sets were now coming on the market, because wireless, of course, had been making big strides. There had been radio stations opening up and down the country, and it was now big business. There was quite a lot of factories had opened making wireless sets, and because things were going well for us, I'd been able to get one of these wireless sets. I remember it was a Corsair, and in those days it seemed really nice, because previously what we'd been listening in on was home-built sets. At the beginning of 1931, my trade union views again got me into trouble. Ericsson's, as a works, didn't have a lot of trade unionists. It was only the fully skilled men who were in any union. All the rest were non-union men. And even in the model department where I worked, where there were mostly skilled men, there was only a few of those who were in the AU. So I thought it was part of my duty as a trade union secretary to try and get the men in the model department into the union. So I approached one or two, and going on all right until one of the men who I approached, although I didn't know it at the time, he told the foreman that what I was doing. Well, the next thing that happened, I was called to the foreman called me to his office at the end of the shop. And unfortunately, it wasn't the original foreman who took me on in the first place. He died, unfortunately, and this was a new one. And he was very, very much anti-trade union. And so he reported me to the manager, and the next thing I was called up into the office by the foreman, and told that I was no longer wanted, and I had 2 hours' notice, so that I went to work after dinner on that particular day, when everything seemed all right. And when I got home at night, of course, my job had gone. So you can understand how I felt about that, because I hadn't been really doing anything. I hadn't been agitating or anything like that. Well, of course, the effect of that was that after a bit we were soon in financial difficulties again, because, as I keep repeating, with nothing but unemployment pay from the government. I did have I think it was about 7 shillings a week unemployment pay from the union at this time, because they were getting on their feet again, and a lot of the benefits that had been cut off because of this strike in 1922 had now been restored. But the point is that, of course, I was out of work again. So now I was tramping round Nottingham to see if I could find a job. But the trouble in those days was that trade unionism wasn't as strong as it might be. And, well, a lot of the unions, there'd been the general strike in between. This happened in 1926. And of course, a lot of the unions were hard put to financially. And the whole effect of it was that it put all the power in the hands of the employers. And if I went, we'll say for instance, if I went to a firm where I thought there might be a chance of getting a job, and this actually happened, they might offer me a job, but or tell me that there was a vacancy at any rate if I was suitable. But then they wanted a reference from my last employer. They didn't want a written one, but they usually, what happened was they got on the phone to your last employer, and of course you were practically blacklisted again, because when Ericsson's or told them that the reason I'd been discharged, well, then they didn't want any more to do with me. So I was in a very difficult position. In fact, I remember going to Leicester. I went as far afield as Leicester. There was a firm there that made typewriters, and I had an interview with the manager, and he asked me, he said, I think we can fix you up. And he went away, and he said, where do you work last? And I told him. Well, he went away and said, I'll not be a minute. And I was sat there for about an hour in the office waiting, and heard nothing, and I thought that's rather strange. But of course what had happened was he'd phoned through to Ericsson's, and they'd told him the same thing, why I'd been sacked. And after I'd been sat there an hour waiting, the young woman who was the clerk in the office, I said, what's happened? It's a long time in coming back, isn't it? And she said, I'm sorry, she said, but he told me to tell you that we have no vacancies. And that was, it practically took me on. And that was the sort of thing I had to put up with then. And that lasted from January of 1931 till about August of the same year. I was out of work all that time. There was one little incident that I feel I ought to tell you, and this was that, of course, it meant, as I said, we were short of money again, and we had coal fires in those days, and Boots were building that new factory where it stands today. And there was a lot of spare pieces of wood that the joiners had sawn off lengths of planks and all that sort of thing. And anybody was allowed to go and take these spare pieces for firewood. And I remember we'd still got an old pram that we had for Sheila. And I can remember I went one morning and I took Sheila in the pram, and I filled it up with these pieces of wood, and then put Sheila on top of the wood and wheeled her back to Alexandra Crescent. Of course, she thought it was very nice sat on top of this wood. But that's one thing that really interesting, I thought. There was a thing of interest that occurred during this period when I was out of work, and that was the flood. Now, one afternoon, it was in midsummer, it wasn't in winter, it was in midsummer, and I think it was the result of the previous hard winter, when after the winter, there'd been a lot of rain, and there'd been a lot of snow first, of course, and all that had melted, and it must have took it a long time before it reached the Beeston part of the river. And consequently, it came down the river so fast that the river couldn't take it, and so it flooded. Well, I'd heard about, I don't know whether how I'd heard, but I'd got to know that the floods had reached almost to the houses in the other side of the railway. Of course, the houses then didn't go beyond Victory Road, and the flood had reached Victory Road, and I heard about this. So, and as it was continuing to rise, I thought, well, I'll go and stand at the junction of Queen's Road and Station Road, and when I saw it coming up, my idea was to go and take the floor coverings and certain pieces of furniture upstairs to be safe. And I remember this afternoon standing at the corner, and I was watching the flood come up and when it got to this side of the railway, I went back to Alexander Crescent to tell your mum that we better start taking some of the floor coverings up and that sort of thing. Well, when I got there, the flood had already reached the house. What had happened, and while I was watching it come up Station Road, it had come up round the back to the houses, and because it was lower there, by the time I got to the house, back to Alexander Crescent, there was about 6 inches of water all round. So we didn't manage to get the floor covering up, because I still didn't think it would come up to the house, because although there was 6 inches of water in the road was there was a slope from the road up to our front door, which meant it'd have to rise about another foot before it got to the inside the house. So we didn't think that would happen, and we went to bed that night thinking all was well. And next morning I got up and I went downstairs, and just as I was getting to the bottom of the stairs, I put my foot in water, and there was a good foot of water right through the house. It had kept on coming up during the night, and the back garden was lower than the front garden, and there was already about 2 foot of water in the back garden, and the dustbin was floating around. And the consequence was that we had to go upstairs. There was a little fireplace in the bedroom, and we had to do all the cooking on this little fire in the bedroom. And I can even remember the drains weren't working, and of course there was no toilet upstairs. There was only the one toilet downstairs, and that, because of the flood, of course all the drains were full up, and we had to use the chamber and throw the contents out of the window into the floods. And there's some strange, funny things happening, I can tell you. And I remember one man. We were all in the same boat all round Alexander Crescent. We were all living upstairs, and I can remember people were opening the bedroom windows and shouting to one another. And I remember one fella who never bothered much with his garden, and I remember him shouting, "My garden's just as nice as yours now." Joan and Eileen couldn't go to school because of the floods, because it was on the same level, the ground was on the same level as Alexander Crescent and Queen's Road. In fact, it wasn't very far from Queen's Road, it was in Nether Street. And I had to go, I remember I had to go to the Labour Exchange every so often to sign on while I was unemployed, and I had to take my shoes and stockings off and pull my trousers over above my knees, and I had to paddle through to the Labour Exchange. Well, I was actually unemployed until August of 1924, But one day when I went to sign on at the Labour Exchange, there was a notice up notifying applicants that a firm in Nottingham required tool makers. This was Lloyd and Ramsden's, and they made cine cameras and projectors, not for cinemas, but more for the ordinary people, so that they could make a film outside. Well, they'd been contacted by a distributor firm, and the name was Coroner, I think that was the name, some name like that. No, Coronet, that was it, Coronet. And they'd got in touch with Lloyd and Ramsden's, and they wanted them to make a new cine camera that was going to be a lot cheaper than the existing ones at that time. And this firm wanted tool makers, of course, to make the tools that would make the parts for these new cine cameras. Well, I went and I applied for a job there, and I was taken on. I was told by the foreman when I was taken on that I'd be given a month's trial, and that if I wasn't satisfactory at the end of that month, I would be discharged. Well, I wasn't discharged. I wasn't sacked at the end of that month, so evidently I was given satisfaction. But the main thing was that it took us from then until just before Christmas of 1934 in order to get all the tools done. But just thinking back for a moment, though, I'm not sure now whether it was actually 1934 or 1933. But that, by the way, I might find out later on just what year it was. But I remember we eventually got the tools done for this job, and we made the first 200 of these cameras for delivery to the distributing firm. Well, they found out that when it came to deliver it, when they wanted to deliver to this firm, and they wanted naturally to be paid for the first 200, they found out that the firm had gone broke, and our firm, Lloyd and Ramsden's, were left with all these tools and all the parts that would make more cameras. Well, they were in a bit of a mess then, because they were hard up for cash themselves, and they'd even had to borrow cash from the bank to keep them going until they got paid by this firm. What happened as a result of that was that all the tool makers got the sack, and all the extra men that they'd taken on to deal with this new camera, they all got the sack. And of course, as I was one of the extra men who'd been taken on, I again got the sack. Well, luckily, the president of the Beeston branch of the engineering union, of which I was the secretary, of course, when he heard what had happened, I was only out of work for about a week, when he came round and he said his firm had required a skilled man, and the thing was that it was heavy engineering. It wasn't the type of engineering that I was used to. But he said if you're prepared to have a try at it, they were prepared to give me a job at this firm. But I would have to do all kinds of work like drilling and shaping and marking off and all the different things. Of course, I could do all these things, but as I say, I wasn't used to the heavy work that they did in this firm. In fact, they made presses themselves. Well, I took up this job, and it lasted for quite well. It lasted over nearly 12 months. But first of all, because I'd got this job and it lasted, as I say, I was getting regular wages now each week. So that Christmas that came after I'd got this job, because we got the money now to travel to the Holt, we went up again to the Holt to spend Christmas with our parents. And my parents were making a special do for this particular Christmas because they wanted all the children and the grandchildren to be present at this at Christmas. So we had quite a nice Christmas then. But I came back, and luckily there was nothing happened to upset us this time. Christmas seemed to have been a bad time for us in some ways, but I went back to work in the new year, and one day when I was out, just walking round, I happened to meet one of the men who'd been sacked along with me at the time when we were at Lloyd and Ramsden's. So we got talking, and I said, "Where are you working at present?" He said, "I'm working at the Raleigh in the tool room." So he said, "Why don't you go after a job there, Jack?" So I decided, he said, "There's always the chance you might get on there." So I went and applied at the Raleigh, and I was accepted and told to start, I think it was in about a week's time. So I went back to the firm that I'd been working for, this heavy engineering firm, and gave a week's notice in. And then I went to the branch meeting, the trade union branch meeting on the Friday of that week. And I was telling a fellow I knew there, I said, "I'm coming to work in your tool room on Monday." And he said, this man, by the way, was a foreman. And I said, "I'm coming to work in your firm on Monday." So he said, "Well, what department are you coming in?" So I said, "The press tool room." So, he said, "No, you're not." So I said, "Why? What's up?" Well, he said, I'd heard about you being taken on, and I knew that you didn't have much experience in press tools, not enough for a firm like the Raleigh, and I thought you'd be better in my tool room, which made general tools like jigs and fixtures and gauges and things like that. So I didn't mind as long as I got a good regular job. So I went working under this fella. His name was Harry Hart. And, well, the Raleigh at that time, they designed a new motorbike. Because at one time they'd made motorbikes as well as cycles, and they designed this new one, and that's why this work was going in Harry Hart's tool room, because anything new in an engineering factory, you need new tools to start before you start making the things. And I was working under him for about 6 months. And then the firm, Raleigh, suddenly decided that not to go ahead with these motorbikes, but to just stick to cycles. I don't know the reason, but anyway, that's how it happened. So that meant that a lot of his toolmakers had to be sacked. And he came to me. He came to me and he said, "Well, Jack, it was partly my fault that you came working with me because you had got this job in the press tool room." So he said, "I'm going over to Bill Aaron, he was the foreman of the press tool room, and I'll see if I can get him to take you on. Because I feel responsible, because you would have gone to him in the first place had I not intervened." So he went over and he came back and told me to go and see this Bill Aaron. And I went to see this Bill Aaron and he said, "What are you?" I said, "I'm a tool maker." He was a Yorkshireman, this Bill Aaron, very straight. He says, "I don't believe you." But he says, "In any case," he said, "I'll give you a month's trial." He said, "And if at the end of the month I'm not satisfied with you, I'll give you notice and I don't want any trouble." So I said, "All right, I'm willing to go on a month's trial." Well, that was in 1934 now, and 1934, yes, that's what it was, 1934. Well, no, I'm wrong again in dates. You must excuse me, but this was all in 1935. Yes, 1935. But that month was extended from 1935 to 1963, so that I did 28 years with the Raleigh. So evidently I was satisfactory there. Mind you, the Raleigh was the best paid job that I've ever had. In fact, even in the tool rooms, they paid higher wages than what Ericsson's used to pay. And apart from the weekly wage for an ordinary week's wages, they had a kind of a bonus scheme, and you could earn 33 and a third % of your wages extra